Hi everyone. My name is Michiel Freislich. I work for BlueScope in the Future Technologies team, and we drive the projects that should get BlueScope to net zero by 2050. What's the slide? Did I just press there? Right, there you go. Right, so BlueScope's decarbonisation journey is on this slide. We're a company of $10 billion market cap, 7,000 people locally, and we operate 100 sites across Australia, so decent size. We have a strict target of net zero 2050. We cannot miss that. We're committed to that, and some interim targets there. And we're quite focused on running a sustainable business, so we're doing a lot of capital investment on our value chain currently to maintain that as best practice. But we've, over the last couple of years, we started with a really aggressive, a really strong program to create the new future, as we call it, new steel investments. It's highlighted there in green for a reason. There's a couple of keynotes there. That first project, Project Iron Flame, is a key project where we looked at literally every mine in Australia, all the gas deposits. It's our vehicle to invest in key future resources, and a key part of the strategy development in BlueScope. And then we do investments across our value chain. You can see the number there. And we're also putting a new EAF in to replace a carbon-based kiln at New Zealand, which will reduce the greenhouse intensity on New Zealand by 50%. Right, so when we looked at Port Kembla Steelworks is the biggest steel plant in Australia. When we looked at Port Kembla, we looked at the three options there to decarbonize it. The blast furnace can be decarbonized. It's obviously carbon-based, but unfortunately it requires a large investment in CCUS to actually get to net zero. It's not our preferred route. So we also looked at the electric arc furnace fed with a DRI plant. You can see that option there listed number 2. That process is still one of our key focus areas. You can use natural gas or hydrogen to produce a DRI. Both of them give you very good decarbonization results, and feed that straight into a steel furnace. Well-known route, but unfortunately it needs high quality DRI. And only 5% of the current ore that's currently used worldwide for steel making is high quality DRI. So DRI of that quality is not that freely available, and that's why we're also looking at the electric smelting furnace, where you use the same technology, but you actually put that into a smelter and you produce liquid iron, and that process allows you to use high gang iron ores. And we are doing will be a very large pilot plant to develop that technology at Port Kembla, which I'm involved in. We think it gives you more or less same results, with obviously different benefits. Natural gas, let's talk about natural gas. Natural gas, after Iron Flame, we came to a conclusion that natural gas is to us the first step in the decarbonization journey. If you compare a blast furnace to a natural gas-based DRI process, you reduce the carbon emissions by 60%. That's very significant. If you give us natural gas at $6 a gigajoule Australian, I'm sure, and BlueScope is confident that would cause it would be a really attractive investment for green iron, to start off green iron investment in South Australia. But it will also secure sovereign steelmaking in Australia. The best part about it is it sets you up. Once you build a furnace like that, you can easily transition to hydrogen if the hydrogen is available. And that immediately gives you another 25% carbon reduction. Right, so let's talk about the competitive advantages. So the first one is, we talked about ore already. I thought Bronwyn did a really great job there. Australia, as a comparative advantage, got a lot of iron ore, good iron ore. Unfortunately, the gangue content in most magnetites are above, when it reaches the pellet stage is too high. So most of the magnetites aren't suitable currently. So we need some breakthroughs there, and technology breakthroughs in both mining, beneficiation, and steelmaking is needed. Infrastructure, if you look at Walhalla, there's a lot of good things happening there because you've got a supply chain. Supply chain for steelmakers are critical. You need good rail, you need ports to get your product out, you need electricity, you need water, but there's also good access to renewables, and that's why we are actually talking to South Australia. We like this, working with the South Australian government on this. Natural gas is to us a key resource. We think, up in Beetaloo Basin, there's a lot of natural gas for us, but we need to have the right policy settings to develop gas and make it available for hard-to-abate industries locally. That is a much more affordable pathway than hydrogen in the short term, and it can get us started on green iron. We need scrap. I'm not going to worry about scrap too much. It's the best. It's the most affordable source of iron units. You need that to actually be competitive. Let's focus on another challenge for us, which is policy. We compared our policies to Australian policies now to Europe and America, and a lot of it doesn't stack up yet. So the Australian governments are doing a lot in the space now. It is work that is absolutely crucial to allow us to invest. BlueScope will invest $6 billion if we make this transition. It's similar to our market cap. This is how big the transition is, and that is only our own process plant. We need support from government, like a carbon tax, carbon border tax to protect that investment, and investments and incentives for capital or support for capital investment. And lastly, energy costs. So when you look at hydrogen and you compare hydrogen against natural gas, you need approximately $30 a megawatt hour firmed power costs at the steelworks gate to actually make hydrogen competitive to natural gas. That's $30 firmed. Currently, we pay $140 to $150 a megawatt hour. We are 5 times too high. So we need a massive rollout of renewables to actually help us lower that cost curve. That is key to us. Last thing is government. Working with with a government that's supportive to us is critical. We can't make this. People ask me why is BlueScope in South Australia? Isn't this only where GFG plays? No, we are looking at mines here. We are looking at putting process plant in here, and the South Australian government is really receptive to working with us, and that is really important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Michiel. I'd like to invite Rebecca Knol up to speak.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in today's panel. The South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy is a strong supporter of low-carbon iron and steel production in Australia. Our member companies are directly responsible for exploring, extracting, transporting and producing the resources necessary to realise this ambition. The South Australian Government has articulated our state's comparative advantages and support for green iron and steel production as part of the State Prosperity Project, and again in the strategy released today. The Malinowskis government has laid the foundations, industry is supportive and ready to partner. There is international interest and there is an aggressive 2030 timeline to navigate. So what is needed to deliver this opportunity? We have seen a raft of strategies released by successive governments, all of which set ambitious headline targets aimed at growing the economy, hitting higher production targets, or establishing new markets. This newest strategy joins a desktop of others. Strategies are great documents for political and media announcements. They are useful for setting vision, as promotional tools. They can help to leverage the all-important investment dollars, but they do not, in and of themselves, result in change, because change is dependent on the how. How are we going to resolve the first principle issues of feedstock, water, power, supply, and path to market? Of all the strategies listed above, the Regional Mining Infrastructure Plan, or RMIP, has stood the test of time because it was big on the how. It gave consideration to how and was grounded in collaboration with resources and energy sector through the Resources Infrastructure Task Force, of which SACOME was a member. The RMIP's DNA lives on in many of SACOME's advocacy requests, and this is best exemplified by the Northern Water Project. Key to the Northern Water Project is a deeply methodical approach to project delivery and development. And Infrastructure South Australia are congratulated for their outstanding and their relentless focus on the how of project delivery across 2 terms of government. Realising the vision of the green iron and steel strategy will require addressing first principles, getting the sequencing right, and importantly, being really honest about the timeline and pathway to implementation. Strategy and vision are important, and I applaud the government's vision for green iron and steel production in the future. Political will is an important part of any equation, but stakeholders are tired of ambitious and unachievable headlines that capture the media cycle and sidestep the how. Stakeholders want to know how the vision is going to be achieved. So in closing, I'd like to thank the Department for understanding the importance of co-designing, co-developing and co-delivering with industry on this ambition. Thank you.
Excellent, and thank you, Rebecca. Wayne Harris.
Thanks, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wayne Harris. I work as part of our Global Industrial Planning Office for GFG. GFG is a global company, so we've got iron and steel making facilities across the globe in UK, US, Europe, and of course here in Australia on our east coast we have a number of electric arc furnaces and the Whyalla steelworks as well. I guess we're asked today to talk a little bit about what's driving this global change and what the opportunity is, particularly for South Australia. And I probably don't need to tell everybody in the room how vital iron and steel is. It's in everything we use every day. It's in the buildings we're in. It's in the cars we drive. It's in the phones we use. But of course, it does have its own challenges as well. And we call this, I guess, a trilemma that we're facing. I think Kaysa mentioned it before. Iron and steel count to about 8% of global emissions, which is pretty significant. It's a hard-to-abate industry. At the same time, the demand for iron and steel is growing across the globe. We're effectively putting up more than we're pulling down. So we still need that virgin iron production, which uses iron ore to do it. Of course, there's an increase in scrap production, but the demand is growing. So we're putting up more buildings than we can actually support with the scrap that we're pulling down. And of course, the third area, and rightly so, is governments and communities across the world are very focused on lowering emissions. So for us, this is a big driver. It's led to our announcement of our ambition to be carbon neutral in our steel businesses by 2030. Now, one of the things that we do see, because we're here in South Australia, is that South Australia has such a significant advantage and opportunity. And it all starts, as we've talked about already by a number of speakers, with magnetite. We're fortunate enough to have such a high quality magnetite here in South Australia. And the overall opportunity this represents, not just for us, but the whole industry in the area, is significant. Of course, there's areas to focus on, and I think we'll talk further about that later today. But even some of those that we're aware, we need the rail, we need the natural gas and the hydrogen, we need the water, we need that port infrastructure. We're fortunate enough to have existing port process ourselves already. And these are all areas to focus on. Of course, the other ingredients are also already here, and this is why it makes it such an ideal location. For us, we already have a high quality magnetite resource in our Middleback Ranges mine, which is linked to our steelworks already. We've been mining in that area for over 100 years. We've been mining magnetite for the last 16 years. And we've now gone through the process of developing that concentrate into a direct reduction pellet that we've tested around the world in direct reduction facilities. The next step in the process to replace the coking coal in a blast furnace traditional process is, as Kayser mentioned this morning, is to move to a direct reduction process. And fortunately, that process has been around for quite a while, which many of you, I'm sure, are aware. Since the 1970s, a lot of that using natural gas, reforming it actually to split the hydrogen out already. So that process exists, and as does the electric arc furnace process to turn that iron, or green iron, into steel or green steel. We have those furnaces on the east coast of Australia already producing with scrap metal across the country. The other ingredients are also here as well. Natural gas, hydrogen, and we're fortunate enough with the announcement we made in February, working with Santos on natural gas, but also with the Office of Hydrogen Power on the hydrogen that they're producing, the facility near us in Whyalla. On top of that, the other key ingredients that we have is a very forward-looking government, which is fantastic, and also a community and industry that exists and is ready for this transition as well at the same time. So this is an outline of the process that we already have underway. We've started work, as I mentioned, on the expansion of our mine. We announced last year that in amongst that 18 million, we have a 4 billion tonne, sorry, 18 billion or 19 billion. We have a 4 billion tonne resource, which we're expanding, first of all, to 2 million tonnes, but then further and further of making magnetite concentrate from there. We also have our work underway on the direct reduction facility, as well as the electric arc furnace, which we've announced. And of course, the announcement around the energy and the key feed into that, with the renewables feeding into hydrogen and also natural gas in the process. So the opportunity that we really see is significant. The work is underway. It's a very fortuitous opportunity that we all have here in South Australia with all those right ingredients happening. And the opportunity and impact is significant. Not only the emissions reduction, moving from a blast furnace process to halving it with natural gas and further with hydrogen, but also the economic impact, the community impact, and the opportunity that South Australia has to lead this change into green iron and green metals across the whole country because we have these ingredients all here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And now we've got, finally, Anthony Garnaut, the Chief Executive of Zen Energy.
Thank you very much. Zen Energy is a renewable retailer. I'm honoured to share the stage this morning with our first 2 customers. Minister Coots and Tonis signed us up on a 3-year contract when we first became a retailer in 2017, and Rebecca was our second customer in convening the South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy buying group. So it's been a 7-year journey now for Zen in working out what's the role of a utility, of an electricity business in the energy transition. I think we've got to base 1, which is working out how to serve customers in the existing customers in the market. And over the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of our time exploring the new market, the superpower industries, which my father Ross has written a lot about. We're a company that's committed to science-based targets. We're committed to the Paris Agreement, and I guess my interpretation of that is that means we need to do everything we can to accelerate the renewable transition. Part of that is being successful as a business, but part of it is also understanding what are the critical barriers that stop that prevent the energy transition. There's if you've read any of the superpower books or other versions of it, there's a potential for Australia to punch well above its weight in the global decarbonisation effort. We could be ranked number maybe 3 in the world in terms of contribution to decarbonisation, with just if we decarbonise our iron ore and bauxite scope 3 emissions. So our question is, okay, how do we get that going? So just in prepping for today, I just went through what are the 10 things required to get a green iron industry going in Australia. And this comes out of over the last couple of years. We've been working, we've formed a green iron project to look at how does this industry come about, what is the role of an energy utility in that industry. And I'll just run through this list quickly. I think we've got 9 of those 10 elements here, and we're missing the 10th. As you've heard today, the starting point is there's a lot of renewable energy in South Australia. That's an essential starting point. If you look at the cost of a green iron value chain, there's leaving aside the iron ore, assuming you're importing that, our costing of a 500,000 tonne DRI plant is around $500 million. You're adding the same again for a hydrogen plant, and then around 4 times that cost for the energy to meet that. So green iron is really about green energy. 5 parts out of 6 of the capital base is about getting the energy supply right, and 1 part is about the DRI, the actual plant. So that's a great start in South Australia. I mean, if you look at here, there's we've got a market that's already 75% renewable. That means that a lot of the time, about 30% of the time now, there's too much electricity in the market. Prices are negative. And just one simple statistic that sort of drives this home. If you operated a hydrogen plant on a 60% capacity factor, you're taking the 60% of the cheapest prices throughout the year, the average cost of electricity supply is 0. And that's simply what you get from averaging the bottom 30% of prices, which are minus $50, with the next 30%, which are around 50. So that's a great starting point. And if you look around the market, at Whyalla, it's not hard at all to find 2 terawatt hours of new renewable projects that are ready to go. Around Port Pirie, which we think is another good location for green iron, it's easy to find again another 2 terawatt hours. So that's not a problem. We then moved to an electricity retailer to turn that intermittent energy into renewables. Well, there's at least one company willing to do that. And that's what we see our role in the market is. Just the cost of a PPA isn't the reference price for the cost that a hydrogen plant pays. While $30 is a target price, that doesn't mean a wind PPA needs to be $30, because there's a market that can be leveraged. There are these negative prices that can be net leveraged, and I'm a bit scared of offering you a $30 price, but not too far off if we get the structure of a contract right. So I don't think that's a problem. We need someone to build a hydrogen plant. We heard from someone this morning who's made that commitment. Not a problem. We then moved to the iron ore supply side of things. I think that at least 2 companies in this room that are well advanced in their plans to build iron ore mines. I don't think supply of iron ore is a problem in South Australia. We then moved to we need someone to coordinate all the infrastructure. We've heard from several members of the state today on the new legislation, planning. We hear that planning and approvals, coordination shouldn't be a problem. We need someone to build all the infrastructure. And I've seen in the convention today a number of parties, engineering, construction companies that are there waiting, saying, yeah, give me a contract, I'm ready to build it. I can do that well. We then need someone to market the green iron. And again, in the room today, I've seen at least 2 of the global commodity traders that are saying, yeah, if there's a decent grade of DRI here, I can place that in the markets of the Northern Hemisphere. So again, marketing's not a problem. And we need people to turn that green iron into finished product. And I've seen at least 3 people in the room from Japan and Europe who are amongst the largest steel producers in the world, who know how to turn DRI into the final product. So that's 9 elements where, yeah, makes sense. What are we missing? Why isn't a green iron industry happening today? And I think it's at the 10th. Who's going to own a DRI plant? Anyone? So if you say who's going to own the renewable energy project, we'll have lots of people put up their hands, but there's no one in this room, I think, today, including the steel makers representing the steel companies of Northern Europe, who are at the moment saying, yep, as long as we can meet these parameters, cost of hydrogen and so forth, I'm ready to own a DRI plant and take that commitment to operate it. So we heard, I was really pleased today that we heard from one company that has made that commitment, which is H2 Green Steel. So they've got to financial close on their project. They're 700 days off commencement of production. It's really interesting to me that wasn't, that first green iron project in the world wasn't built by Baow Steel, the biggest steel producer in the world, or by ArcelorMittal, the second biggest, or by BHP, the biggest iron ore producer, and so on. It was built by a startup. And what did they have? They had a single thing of commitment to science-based targets, commitment to the Paris Agreement, and then they built an ecosystem around that. They found their customers who were also committed to science-based targets, and we saw 15 of them, who were willing to pay what it takes, what it costs to buy green iron, because they knew that they were required to do it. And there's a government there that's committed, and therefore that means a carbon tax. And I was interested to hear my colleague here say we really need a carbon tax, that later revised to a carbon border tax. But I think that's the thing. If we had a carbon tax in Australia, it would be a different equation. You wouldn't need $6 gas. You'd need a different price of hydrogen that would be achievable, because otherwise you're paying a massive tax that you wouldn't have to pay if you're going down a green route. So that's I think that's the central question that we need to focus on. What does it take to attract that critical person who can go to Port Pirie and connect up the rail line to this already existing iron ore project and come down to this already existing renewable energy project? But without that person making the commitment to actually invest in to be willing to invest in a green iron plant, then we don't have a conversation. So I think this to me is what the task is between this and the next conference next year, to articulate all of these 9 bits that are working, to be able to show that these are all the inputs, the feed-ins, capital environment, regulatory tax, rebates from the Future Made in Australia scheme and so forth. That all leads to a financial model where there's a decision. And that decision probably won't stack up if we're existing in a world that doesn't care about the Paris Agreement. But if you frame it as, yep, the Paris Agreement is there, we've got to get to a certain destination by 2050, which means moving in a straight line or an accelerated line from now, then I think that answer is yes. There are plenty of companies that will be willing to make that investment. So it's then a task of turning all of what we want to contribute into assumptions, into a simple business case, a simple financial model, and then going on a roadshow through the major steel producing countries of the Northern Hemisphere. And I'd expect that within a year's time, we've got at least 3 parties that are saying, yes, we'll do that. And that's, I guess, the challenge that I'm giving to the floor over the next year. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. I feel like a lot has been said about what are the key factors that really underpin South Australia's ability to become a leading producer and exporter of green iron and green steel on the global stage. But I do want to throw that question back to the whole panel, starting with Bronwyn. What do you think? If you have comments, otherwise we can just move on. Okay, Rebecca, do you have comments, especially after everything you've heard, on what you think are the key factors that underpin South Australia's success?
Look, I think the fact that we've got everyone here today ready to co-design, ready to collaborate, really underpins an ability to move forward. We've got the government that's supportive, and they're not out saying, I'm going to give you the answer. They're asking you. They're asking you to come back and say, well, what is it we need? What is the support from government that you need to actually make this a reality? And of course, we've talked about all the comparative advantages, but I think transformative opportunities require collaboration, they require risk-taking, and we're in a position to do that.
That's excellent. And that's a good segue, actually, to ask the people on the panel from industry for specific comments on your perspectives on how government can support the growth of the green iron and green steel industry while ensuring environmental sustainability and social responsibility. Can pass the microphone. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
They're on? Yes. We've come from a position at SACOME where there's two things that have been critically needed. First one is an economic heat map. We need to understand the value of the resources in the ground, particularly in relation to this. And Bronwyn, you put up a terrific slide which highlighted that 47% of the iron ore that could feed into a DRI plant is actually sitting on the Eyre Peninsula. So how do we get it out of the Eyre Peninsula? The other 40% of the magnetite is sitting in the Braemar. How do we get it out of the Braemar? Because unless we have the feedstock coming in from the Braemar or the Eyre Peninsula, we've got a much reduced project. So for us, it's concluding that work around an economic heat map. The second part, and it's pleasing to see it in the strategy that's been released today, is this shared infrastructure corridors. And there has been a significant amount of work done on that in government, and we applaud that work and hope it continues. But those shared corridors help to de-risk projects. So if you're a proponent and you've got the reserve, you need to get it to market. And the best way for you to get it to market is for government to support a shared infrastructure corridor so that you can de-risk your projects and bring that feedstock to market sooner.
That's excellent, very practical. Wayne, did you have comments?
Yeah, I guess sort of linking with the earlier question as well, there are a number of key ingredients in there. There's the technology, which we've talked about, which exists, the resource, which is the most important piece, but there's other factors, which includes our end customers and bringing them on the journey and linking into this, as well as the government's role in the overall process and the community. So it's all a partnership in all of those areas. So the role the government plays is really vital, and it's great to the work the South Australian government's doing here. I guess in a practical sense, it's about giving certainty to those customers, the investors, to everybody who needs to be part of that process in parallel, and the infrastructure, so rail corridors, gas, hydrogen, and how that works also with shipping at the same time, and the natural process for that.
Michiel.
Yep. So I'll have just a quick comment there. So steelmakers are economically rational beings. We take decisions to, generally speaking, fairly conservative, but we're trying to protect our supply chains, our shareholders, our stakeholders, customers. If we make a massive investment, and an investment like a couple of $1 billion in new process plant, that's a massive investment for us. It needs to be rational. How do you get it to be rational? It needs to be, so scale is really critical. Building a new port is an example. You build that for 50 million tons of mining capacity, not for 5. So you need to be scale. That's one. The second one, the policy environment. Sweden has been very good. Anthony talked about it with Freislich Green Steel. But SSAP is doing the same. They're very good at de-risking it for their iron and steel makers by setting up supply chains, providing the infrastructure, providing power, backing up the power, making sure it's firm. In that case with nuclear, by the way, but which is I know not by necessity where we want to go, but it's interesting. It's really interesting how the Swedish government is trying to put a framework in place to allow these things to just happen, and I think that is key for us. We'll move, and we'll move to try to preempt it. We'll move relatively fast, once the conditions are ready. But currently, we can't expose a business like BlueScope, putting $300 a ton in additional cost for capital down and not recovering that. We won't do that. It's not economically rational yet to move, at this point. But we think it might be soon.
Okay. I feel like I want to say everything's on the table. You can open discussion and feel free to go as far as you feel you need to. And I'll throw that back to the audience as well and remind you, I am keeping an eye on my phone for questions that are coming in from the floor that I can pose directly to the panel. So please do put your questions into Slido if you have any. And then, I think, Anthony, you probably also have some comments on what the government can do. But I thought that Michiel posed some things that Rebecca, you might want to respond to. Did you? Okay, so I'll go, Anthony.
What's the role of government? I think we're in a period where we're at the end of a 30-year, 40-year journey where governments have been trusting markets to solve problems, and I think this is over the last couple of years, or since COVID, I think that reminded everyone that actually markets don't solve all problems, and everyone, or businesses during COVID, were looking to governments like, give me the rules, work this out, because individual or corporations don't have the power to stop a pandemic. I think we're in we're moving into a period of where state intervention is the norm, and I think I'm not for or against that. That's just the reality of the historical direction. Whether you're looking even in a communist place like China, it was much more market-based 10 years ago than it is now, and similar trends are happening around the world. And why is that? Because there's a big shift globally, and for shifts of this scale, government needs to set a vision and needs to plan. And I actually think the South Australian government, what we've heard today, is doing a few of the essential things, but in particular, a bit of long-range planning is really helpful. AMO won't do it. Their ISP isn't really designed as a long-range plan of the efficient path of each state to get to net zero, or whatever it might be. They run an equilibrium model, and it solves it. And at the end of that, they don't really care whether it's a good outcome for consumers and industry or not. They just let the model run. Where the kind of exercise I think you're planning here is about, where do we actually want to be in 2050? What do we want the electricity price to be? If it requires $30 for BlueScope to build a DRI plant, well, let's design the market so that it delivers $30. And there's if the state can play that role of planning, then I think all the support elsewhere is required. You've got Chris Bowen saying he'll provide what it takes to finance all of the new renewables through this capacity investment scheme to get to a certain outcome. But if the South Australian government doesn't come up with a plan that says, build 20% of the capacity investment scheme projects in South Australia and we'll deliver you 10 DRI plants, then Chris Bowen will look and go, South Australia doesn't really need any help. It's already 75% renewable. We'll give it all to Victoria, which needs all the help it can get. So I think it's that role of showing what the future looks like with a detailed plan, and I think the most complicated part of that is the electricity sector that will go a long way to solving the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. I think you make some really valid points about the long-term piece and what we are requiring from governments in this new age, which is why I would encourage the government to step away from this 2030 timeframe. It's 6 years away. We're not going to have a DRI plant up and running in 6 years. We're certainly probably not going to have hydrogen in 6 years. So I think the pathway, setting the vision, setting the vision is one part of it, and that's to be applauded. But a logical, careful pathway forward, which is a long-term plan. All of us deal in long-term businesses. Every developer out there in the Braemar has been sitting on those deposits for decades. Same with the Eyre Peninsula. We are long-term players, and that's why I stress that it's important to step away from a media-invoked timeframe, which is 2030, rather than a longer-term vision about where we want to go as a state.
Okay, I've got some questions that are coming in from the floor. I'll pose them generally, and you can jump in as you feel moved to answer. This one is, are we expecting new steelworks in Australia or expansion of existing major steelworks to meet this growing demand? I would like a brand new steelworks to be likely to include DRI and EAF. Over to you all.
I might start. It makes sense and perfect sense to expand existing steel facility. The skills and labour and the people are really valuable that we have, and transferring them across to the new technology is a vital step. It's also very important from a regional perspective, community perspective, to continue with that industry and that skill and labour is. And it also makes sense because of the other processes that integrate with it, the feeds, our facilities linked to our Middleback ranges already. The process already exists, the shipping already exists, infrastructure exists. So a lot of good reasons to expand on existing facilities and grow from there. That said, in the future, the proximity of the particular parts, I think as the Minister mentioned this morning, having hydrogen next to magnetite resource, understanding that kind of supply chain and how vital that is really critical.
Excellent. Another one is, given the importance of magnetite to South Australia's green iron ambition, why isn't magnetite on Australia's critical minerals list? Other jurisdictions like Canada have included magnetite on their critical minerals lists.
It's a great question.
I'll take that one. The critical minerals list is a carefully curated list by the federal government. And it needs to meet a couple of criteria, and one of them is a supply chain risk, a sovereign risk on supply chain. And so all of the elements and the minerals and the metals that are on that list all have supply chain risk to Australia. And if magnetite and iron ore does not have a supply chain risk right now, and that's why it's not on the list. It's not to say that it's not a very, very important strategic material, and we can push for magnetite. They don't differentiate in Geoscience Australia or anything on iron ore. It's iron ore. So we can push to have that differentiated and push to have it as a strategic material. But right now, it doesn't meet the criteria of a critical minerals.
It's a very clear answer. For BlueScope and GFG, which elements of the green iron and steel value chain are currently the most cost prohibitive still? And do you expect the market to address this over time, or would interventions be required?
I just want to understand that question clearly. So what part of the value chain is most prospective?
Most cost prohibitive.
Cost prohibitive. Okay, I don't think, if you look at the chain, so you just broadly step through from the mine. The concentrator, there are challenges, but I don't think that's really where the challenge is sitting. The challenge is sitting currently in making green DRI, that part of the chain, affordable. The steel making is it's just a cost conversion, so that's possible. But getting from the input pellet to a product that you can put out and put it into solid steel or cast it, that part of the chain where you make the iron is where the cost is really added. both in capital cost and in operational cost for energy.
I guess probably to add to that, it depends on which part of the value chain. If that magnetite is still to be determined, its quality, its resource, the overburden, etc., that has an exploration and a whole process to go through. But yeah, to add to Michiel's point, probably the biggest piece, if we're looking at the opportunity for green iron, is when we look at the size of energy that's required. And South Australia is really fortunate to have some wonderful large developers looking at renewables, also looking at hydrogen production. Sam talked this morning, not only the work that he's doing, but Port Bonython, which he also is working on as well. So the opportunity's there, but the scale that we're talking about, and I think it was touched on earlier, to produce the amount of hydrogen that you need for green iron is a significant increase to the South Australian grid. The work is there, the opportunity is there. It's something that we need to guide through together as we go forward.
Yep, well said. Did you have another response?
No. I think broadly speaking, if you just look at that amount of energy that we would require for BlueScope to transition, right now in Port Kembla, we would add 25% to the New South Wales grid.
Yeah.
Well, we would require more energy than Snowy Hydro is going to produce.
We're now aiming to finish this panel at 12:25 and send you off to lunch. As we're running a tiny bit late, I have a few more questions, and I'm looking out there and can see I'm standing between you and your lunch, but there are some really excellent questions here. How will green steel premiums be protected globally? For example, high emission versus low emission embedded products. Do we know of a global or national regulatory body? And though this is not part of the question, if we don't know of one, should we be trying to set one up?
It's a multifaceted area. So when we look at green steel, when it looks at green steel using scrap production, we already do that. It's the increase of renewables that you use in that process. When it comes to green premiums, that's where the multifaceted complex area gets in place, because right now you need to be in an environment that encourages people in the uptake for that. And people are about to make, as Michiel said, it's a significant investment to sell a product to an existing industry. That said, though, the frameworks are emerging, things such as CBAM and carbon border adjustment mechanisms that are coming in place into Europe and other markets around the world, which start to put a framework around how people value that. But also depends on the local industry and how that's encouraged, which is another space that governments have a really significant role and are looking at as well, how they encourage the building industry to make up those sort of things. So there are so many products and so many ends to it and so many components, it's difficult to put an overarching one area in charge of that.
Yeah, what I am hearing is because the scale of investments is so large upstream, if the value that is downstream on the demand side can be somehow translated up, that would help, and governments can help with that.
Governments can help with that, and it takes time.
Yeah.
But yet we're being first movers and moving in that space. So there's inherent risk in that process as well, and that's where that relationship with all of our partners, from the government through to technology and industry, but also to our customers, becomes very important.
Yeah, Michiel, you seem to.
Yeah, there's a standards issue to this. Wayne has talked about the frameworks are developing, emerging. I think you call it, and that's the right word. There's no universal standard currently that's shared about what green steel is.
Yep.
Because there are plants currently that can produce green steel just using scrap. I mean, Liberty Steel's furnaces in New South Wales is practically green from that perspective. So the problem is really is what do you call green steel? So the standard is a problem. It's developing. World Steel is working on it. Sustainable Steel is working on it. SBTI is science-based is working on it as well. But currently there is no universally shared framework. That is a key issue for us.
Yep.
Needs to be put into place and then shared between governments to actually protect green investments.
And then you add to that the other end of standards, which is around guarantee of origin, etc., and pathway through that.
Another question. The scale of magnetite mining required to globally decarbonise the steel industry is huge. We're talking megapits and giant tailings facilities. How are DEM and other regulators prepared to access these projects? You might be being put on the spot here. Because the scale is really big, we're talking megapits and giant tailings facilities is what the question says. How are DEM and other regulators prepared to access these really big projects?
I think it might be is it assess?
It says access in a text, but...
Look, as DEM's in a position, you know, we have a history in large projects and regulating large projects. I think we all understand here in the room the importance will be environmental, it'll be social licence, bringing people on the journey and ensuring people are, when they're developing mines, when they're bringing this industry to market, are really doing the work that needs to be done to ensure we're doing it in a responsible way. As soon as you have one party not doing it responsibly, that puts the rest of opportunities at risk. DEM is a resource to work closely with the industry to bring these mines to market and have a long history of doing so.
Excellent. And then I might make this the final question given the time. This says, Anthony said, we have the ingredients to build a plant but we lack the capital. Is there room for a joint venture or shared equity model from steelmakers with a third-party institutional investor to at least build a pilot plant?
Good question. I think I said we lack the commitment, and commitment is partly capital, but it's more than that. It's will. I think that's an interesting model. That there are many more parties wanting to buy DRI and willing to pay a premium than there are people wanting to own and operate the project. If you can separate the ownership or the majority ownership from the operation, I think there's a lot of merit into that. And so the kind of consortium ideas where the person who wants to buy the DRI might invest 20 or 40% of the capital, and superannuation capital comes in for the passive majority. I think that's a really interesting model to explore. And I guess where I come at the green iron industry from the electricity sector, and using this 5-to-1 ratio, that there's 5 times as much capital deployed in the renewable energy business than DRI in that value chain. And in this sector, in the electricity sector, a project finance model has emerged where it's mainly passive equity. There's a separation between sort of developer, operator, and owner roles. I think there is a natural extension of that into green iron, where facilities are run as tolling facilities, like the aluminium smelters are in Australia. The operator might be Rio, but doesn't have a strong interest in the whole aluminium supply chain. They're just competent at operating a smelter, and have, in some cases, minority equity. So I think that's a good starting point for a practical analogy.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been a very interesting and really clarifying discussion. Can we just thank all of our panellists? So we are going to make up some time with the lunch break, which was it's due to finish at 1 o'clock. Sorry about that echo, but we'll just come back at 1:05. Enjoy lunch, everyone.